Nice house, daughter. But consider this the invoice for 18 years of free rent and food. My mother, Deborah, didn't say hello. She just shoved a thick manila envelope hard into my chest. The force of it nearly made me drop my wine glass. My boss and coworkers, who had been laughing a second ago, went dead silent. She leaned in close, her voice cold enough to freeze the room. Pay the $212,000, or I take this house to pay off your brother's debts. She turned and walked out the door, leaving me standing there with a lawsuit in my hands. I didn't chase her. I just looked down at the papers. This wasn't a family visit. This was a declaration of war. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The party ended the moment the door clicked shut. My colleagues left in awkward silence, murmuring apologies that I barely heard. I sat alone on the floor of my new entryway, the bottle of champagne warm and unopened beside me, and finally opened the envelope. It wasn't a standard legal complaint. It was a ledger. A handwritten, itemized list, spanning 20 years. October 1998. Formula and diapers. $400. September 2012. High school band fees. $350. June 2016. Room and board during summer break. $1,800. They had calculated interest. They had indexed it for inflation. The grand total at the bottom was circled in red ink. $212,500. They weren't suing for love or attention. They were suing for breach of an implied contract, claiming every meal I ate as a child was a loan I had agreed to repay. Most people would look at this and see insanity. But as I traced the numbers, I didn't feel confused. I felt a sick, familiar slide in my gut. This wasn't new. This was just the official version of the lecture I had heard every night at the dinner table. I'm 26 years old now. I work as a senior forensic auditor for one of the largest firms in the city. My job is to look at messy, complicated financial records and find the truth buried in the math. But I didn't choose this career for the money. I chose it because of them. Growing up, my parents, Richard and Deborah, were masters of financial gaslighting. They trained me to believe that my existence was a cost, a deficit on their balance sheet that I had to apologize for. If I asked for new shoes, my father would pull out a calculator. He would tap in the price, subtract it from his retirement projection, and sigh, making sure I knew exactly how many minutes of his future freedom I was stealing. I spent my entire childhood trying to be an asset instead of a liability. I earned scholarships so they wouldn't pay tuition. I started working at 14 so they wouldn't pay for my clothes. I became an auditor to prove I understood value. But sitting there on my hardwood floor, I realized the truth. You can never pay off a debt that was invented to control you. They didn't want reimbursement. They wanted ownership. And they wanted this house. I looked around the room. This place hadn't been a gift. 2 years ago, I bought it as a distressed foreclosure for $295,000. It had black mold in the bathroom and holes in the drywall. For 24 months, I worked 60-hour weeks at the firm, then came here and sanded floors until my hands bled. I slept on a mattress in the kitchen while I tiled the shower. I built this equity with my own sweat. It was now appraised at $580,000. It was my safety net. Then there was Brandon. My brother is 23. He calls himself a CEO. He runs a cryptocurrency startup that, as far as I can tell, produces nothing but Instagram posts. He lives in a luxury condo downtown that our parents pay the rent on. He drives a leased BMW that is in my father's name. While I was scraping black mold off my ceiling, Brandon was flying to Miami for networking events on Richard's credit card. The math was simple. I ran the numbers in my head as I stared at the lawsuit. Brandon's company was failing. The investors weren't coming. My parents had tapped themselves out funding his lifestyle, and now they needed a new source of capital. They looked at my house and didn't see my home. They saw a piggy bank they could smash open to bail out their golden child. They were trying to force a settlement where I would hand over the deed to make the debt go away. I stood up, my knees popped. I walked to the kitchen, not to pour a drink, but to grab my laptop. I didn't cry. The sadness was gone, replaced by the cold, hard clarity of my profession. They wanted to talk about money? Fine. They wanted to audit the past? I opened my laptop and logged into the credit bureau. If they wanted to sue me for what I owed, I was going to find out exactly what they were worth. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. Lawyers are for defense. For people who want to protect what they have. I wasn't interested in defense anymore. I wanted to understand the offense. I wanted to know exactly why my parents, who had ignored my existence for the last 3 years unless they needed a cosigner, were suddenly willing to burn our relationship to the ground for $200,000. I sat at my kitchen island, the blue light of the laptop screen reflecting in the dark room. I logged into a credit monitoring service. I didn't need to hack anything. Years ago, When I was 18 and building credit, my father had added me as an authorized user on his oldest credit card. He said it was to help my score. I realized later it was just to keep a tether on me. A way to track my spending if I ever used it. I never did. But I never removed myself, either. That oversight gave me legal access to view the primary account holder's activity. I pulled the report. It wasn't just a credit score. It was an autopsy of their financial sanity. The numbers were bleeding red. My parents, who walked around town acting like local aristocracy, were drowning. Their credit utilization was at 98%. They had taken out a second mortgage on their own home 6 months ago. They had maxed out 3 cards I didn't even know existed. Then I looked at the inquiries. Small business loan. Denied. Personal line of credit. Denied. I switched tabs and pulled up the public filings for Brandon's company, Apex Horizons LLC. It was a ghost town. No revenue filings. No tax payments. But the spending? The spending was astronomical. Lease payments on a penthouse office. Travel expenses. Consulting fees paid to shell companies. The picture snapped into focus with terrifying clarity. Brandon wasn't just failing. He was burning cash he didn't have. He was playing CEO with monopoly money, and my parents were the bank. But the bank had run dry. They had tapped out their home equity, their savings, and their credit. They were insolvent. That's why they were here. That's why they brought the process server to a party. They didn't hate me. It was worse than that. They didn't feel anything for me at all. To Richard and Deborah, I wasn't a daughter. I was a liquid asset. I was a bond that had matured. And they were here to cash me out to cover their bad investment in Brandon. The realization should have broken my heart. Instead, it calcified it. The last lingering bit of the little girl, who just wanted her dad to be proud of her report card, died in that kitchen. In her place sat the senior auditor. I cracked my knuckles and opened a fresh spreadsheet. If they wanted to treat this like a business transaction, I would treat them like a hostile takeover target. I wasn't going to argue about fairness or love. I was going to follow the money. I started digging deeper into the transaction histories, looking for the flow of funds. Where did that second mortgage go? How was Brandon still paying for that BMW if the business accounts were empty? I scrolled through lines of data until my eyes blurred, looking for anomalies. And then, at 3 a.m, I found it. A transfer. A large, singular movement of cash that didn't make sense. It was a withdrawal from an account that shouldn't have been touched. I leaned closer to the screen. It was a thread. A single, loose thread in their carefully constructed web of lies. And I was going to pull it until the whole thing unraveled. The transfer I had found was labeled rollover as business startup or ROBS. It was dated 6 months ago. The amount was $312,000. I stared at the number, letting the magnitude of it sink in. That wasn't liquid cash. That was Richard's 401. It was 30 years of saving. His entire safety net, liquidated in a single day. He hadn't just invested in Brandon. He had bet his actual survival on him. He had bypassed the tax penalties by rolling the retirement funds directly into the corporation stock of Apex Horizons. It was a legal maneuver, risky but valid, provided the business followed strict IRS guidelines. But looking at the spending, I knew they hadn't followed a single rule. I dug deeper into the Apex Horizons operating expenses. A startup funded by a ROBS arrangement is supposed to use that money for legitimate business costs. Instead, I saw withdrawals for lifestyle management. I saw lease payments for a condo that matched Brandon's address. They were using the pension as a personal piggy bank. That was tax fraud. But it wasn't the weapon I needed. The IRS takes years to investigate. I needed something immediate. I needed a direct line between their crimes and my damages. And then I saw it. A recurring payment to an American Express card ending in 4092. The number triggered a memory. 3 years ago, I had received a pre-approved offer in the mail for that specific card. I had shredded it. Or at least, I thought I had. I opened a new tab and pulled my own full credit report, the deep dive version I usually only ran for clients under audit. I scrolled past my mortgage, my student loans. And there it was. An American Express Platinum card, opened 3 years ago. The authorized user? Brandon. The primary account holder? Me. They had fished the application out of my trash. They had forged my signature. And for 3 years, they had been maxing it out and paying the minimums with Richard's pension money to keep it hidden. The current balance was $15,400. I pulled the transaction history for the card. It was a catalog of entitlement. Bottle service at clubs in Miami. A weekend at Coachella. Client dinners that were just Brandon and his friends eating Wagyu beef. My hands went cold. They hadn't just sued me for money. They had been stealing from me while smiling in my face at Thanksgiving. They had built their golden child's lifestyle on my credit score. But as I looked at the screen, the coldness turned into a sharp, jagged grin. They had made a mistake. A fatal, arrogant mistake. Richard had used this stolen card, a card legally tied to my personal identity, to pay for Apex Horizons' business expenses. He had used the card to buy office equipment, pay for the website domain, and cover the incorporation fees. In the world of forensic auditing, we call this commingling of funds. By using a fraudulently obtained personal asset to fund the corporation, Richard had destroyed the legal separation between himself and the company. He had pierced the corporate veil. Normally, if you sue a company, you can only take the company's assets. You can't touch the owner's personal money. But because Richard had used fraud to operate the business, the protection was gone. The LLC was no longer a shield. It was a sieve. If I sued for the identity theft, I wouldn't just get the $15,000 back. Because the corporate veil was pierced, I could go after the company's assets to satisfy the judgment. And what was the company's only asset? The $312,000 pension fund. I sat back in my chair. The sun was starting to rise, painting the room in soft gray light. I didn't feel tired. I felt electric. They wanted to sue me for the cost of raising me? Fine. I was going to countersue for the cost of their fraud. I started printing. The Rob's filing. The credit card statements. The forged application. I punched holes in the documents and snapped them into a black binder. I wasn't the defendant anymore. I was the executioner. And I knew exactly where to drop the guillotine. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Deborah. We expect you to settle before the court date. If you sign the house over to Brandon now, we'll drop the interest charges. Don't make us ruin your reputation at work. I stared at the screen, marveling at the audacity. They truly believed they had me cornered. They thought the threat of professional embarrassment would bring me to my knees. What they didn't realize was that in my line of work, reputation isn't built on being nice. It's built on being accurate. And I was about to be very, very accurate. Brandon was hosting a Series A fundraising gala that night at the Ritz-Carlton. He was looking for $1 million in seed money to keep his house of cards standing. He had invited the city's elite, including the managing partner of my firm. That was their leverage. They assumed I would stay away to avoid a scene in front of my boss. They were wrong. I opened my laptop and pulled up the event page. I didn't RSVP as Naomi, the sister. I RSVP'd using my professional credentials. Naomi Vance, Senior Forensic Auditor, Vance & Associates. Then I made one phone call. The event coordinator at the Ritz was a former client. I had helped her clear up a messy tax audit last year. I need to present some due diligence materials during the pitch, I told her. I need HDMI access to the main projector. Consider it done, she said. No questions asked. I dressed for the occasion. I didn't wear a cocktail dress. I put on my sharpest, most severe black suit. It wasn't an outfit for a party. It was attire for an execution. I slipped the black binder into my leather tote, checked my lipstick in the mirror, and walked out the door. The ballroom was dripping with pretension. Crystal chandeliers, rented tuxedos, and a champagne fountain that probably cost more than Brandon's actual revenue for the year. I spotted my parents immediately. They were holding court near the bar, looking like the wealthy benefactors they pretended to be. Richard was laughing too loudly, his hand on the shoulder of a potential investor. Deborah was scanning the room with a predator's gaze. When her eyes landed on me, her face lit up with a smug, triumphant smile. She nudged Richard. They both looked at me, then at the heavy bag on my shoulder. I could read their minds. They thought the binder contained the deed to my house. They thought I was there to surrender, to sign over my life's work to save my reputation. Deborah intercepted me near the stage, her voice dropping to a hiss so the guests wouldn't hear. Smart choice, Naomi, she said, eyeing the bag. I knew you'd come to your senses. Give it to your father after the speech, and we can put this ugly business behind us. Oh, I intend to give him everything he deserves, I said, my voice calm and level. Good girl. She patted my arm, her nails digging in slightly. Just stand in the back and don't embarrass your brother. This is his big night. I wouldn't miss it for the world. I watched her walk away, confident and arrogant, unaware that she was walking on a trapdoor. I moved to the AV booth in the shadows of the stage. The technician nodded at me and handed me the HDMI cable. I plugged in my laptop. The little green light flickered on. I was connected. The trap was set. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit Brandon as he delivered a polished pitch full of empty buzzwords. Investors nodded. My boss checked his watch. Then Brandon claimed our company was backed by substantial family assets. It was a lie. One that publicly pledged my house and my identity as collateral. I pressed the spacebar. His logo vanished. A police report filled the screen. Identity theft. Naomi Vance. Suspect. Richard Vance. The room froze. Brandon turned, speechless. I stepped forward. Let's clarify the assets, I said. As a certified forensic auditor. Another slide. A credit card in my name. Every charge funded his company. This account was opened without my consent. $15,000. Every dollar used for this business. Deborah dropped her wine. Brandon shouted for security. I'm not jealous, I said calmly. I'm a creditor. The final slide exposed the illegal pension transfer and corporate commingling. You broke the rules, Dad, I said. You pierced the corporate veil. Richard lunged. Security stopped him. For 26 years I thought you had power, I said. But it was just stolen money. I faced the room. This afternoon. The court froze all Apex Horizons assets. The pension is seized. The company is bankrupt. And the police are waiting outside. The investors vanished. As officers escorted Richard away, Deborah grabbed me, sobbing that I'd destroyed them. No, I said. You did when you tried to cash out your daughter. I just audited the books. I left without looking back. They lost everything. I sold my house, moved to the coast, changed my number, and cut all contact. Now, when I check my bank balance, I feel peace. It's finally mine. They wanted a return on investment. They got one, just not the currency they expected.